So welcome. This is Visual Studio Tips and Tricks. Obviously, I'm Zain Naboulsi. I'm one of the authors, along with my good friend Sarah Ford. We wrote the book. Here's some contact information for getting a hold of me. There's my email, zainnab@microsoft.com, Twitter @ZainNab, and then my blog, if you want to go, blogs.msdn.com, ZainNab. So this is all in support of our book, of course, Coding Faster, Getting More Productive with Microsoft Visual Studio. And as was indicated earlier, you are going to get a copy of this slide deck. The one big thing you could really do, the greatest honor you could pay me or Sarah, is to take that slide deck and teach some of this stuff that I'm teaching you today to other people. You know, we really have a passion around Visual Studio and the product, and we really want people to know what's out there. So by all means, take this information, run with it. These are some of the things that I think are really useful for folks to know about. All right, so we're not going to, that's enough preamble. Let's just jump right into it. Basically, this session is divided into two halves. The first half is 2010 only tips and tricks, just things that I think are important if you're running Visual Studio 2010. And then the second half, or just a few other tips after that, will be for any version of Visual Studio. Now, of course, the book was written so that you could be using any version of Visual Studio. I'm just kind of making the assumption that the majority of you at this point are probably using Visual Studio 2010. So with that said, let's begin with the new Project Dialog. So I've already got 2010 up, and right away when I go into the new Project Dialog, you may or may not notice some neat features that are in there that tend to get by people sometimes. So for example, as soon as I get in it, have you happened to notice that in the upper right-hand corner is the ability to search installed templates? You can actually now search your installed templates in Visual Studio 2010. So, for example, if I'm looking for web templates, I can type web. Assuming I can type web, let's try that again. There we go. Type web, and it will automatically filter on web-based templates, which is real nice. Now, the only downside right now is it's not filtering on language, but the good news is I can give it a language as well. In fact, what I recommend whenever you're doing this with your templates is you lead off with your language. So if you're a C# developer, you might type C# space web, and it will automatically then filter on C# web templates. Very, very useful. By the way, for those doing VB, of course, it's VB. If you're doing C++, even though there's no C++ web stuff here, it's C++. And then, of course, we do even support, F# and some of the other languages as well. So all of that's in there. Lead off with your language and then put your key term that you want. Now, having said that, this is kind of valuable right now, but maybe not as valuable as it'll be when we get done with this webcast. But one of the things that I think it's not particularly valuable right now in context is most of you have been using Visual Studio for a while, so you pretty much know where your templates are. So finding them isn't a problem, right, with the installed templates. Where the search capability really shines is when you start using the online templates. Let me show you what I mean. If you've never noticed it, there's an online template section in the new Project Dialog, and if you actually click on online templates, it will go out to the Visual Studio Gallery. Now, I don't know if you've been to the Visual Studio Gallery, but there's two really awesome things that are out there. One of them is Microsoft created or community created templates to help you get started with new projects. The other one, or the other things that are available, are extensions. I'm going to address both in this webcast today. We're going to start with the templates. So you can see now I've gone to the online templates. There are broad sections of templates that are available. In addition to that, you see some of the top templates here. They're being sorted by the highest ranked. You can see that here. But you can sort them by different things if you like. And this is where search is really, really useful. So let's say I'm getting ready to start a WCF project. So what I would do is I might type WCF, and it would automatically filter on all these unknown templates on WCF. And that's, again, where real power comes into play for being able to search your templates. Now, I happen to be a VB coder, so maybe I do VB WCF. And there it is, right? Or if I happen to be a C# coder, I do C# WCF. That's good news. Now it's filtering by your language as well. Now, be warned, occasionally you will get some false positives. You can see here, even though I said C# WCF, there's a VB one that snuck in there, but it's fairly rare, and it doesn't happen that often. So feel free to search these templates to give you a leg up on some project or something you're trying to do in Visual Studio. There's a lot of really good content here that can save you minutes, hours, heck, maybe even days of work. All right, with that said, now we've got the templates out of the way and how to search them and the various places you can go, install templates and recent or online templates. There's actually another little section here called Recent Templates. If you click on Recent Templates, this is very, very cool. What Recent Templates does is show you your last 5 most recently used templates. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, I've been traveling around the country, well, really around the world, talking to folks who use Visual Studio all the time. And one thing I've found is that most people, even in, say, a year time frame, only use a very small number of templates. Typically, you've got your web developers who will use 1 or 2 templates. Maybe you do WCF projects all the time. Whatever it is you happen to be doing, you just don't use a lot of templates. So the nice thing about recent templates is, even if you happen to know where your templates are, but you find yourself kind of digging to find them, recent templates allows you to forget all that. Just stay in recent templates, and it will show you the templates you use most often so you can reuse them quickly and easily. So again, very, very valuable type of opportunity there in the new Project Dialog. All right, so that's it for the new Project Dialog. Now, every once in a while, I'll check and see if there are any questions, so bear with me as I'm checking the queue here and refreshing it. I'm kind of new to this tool, but I don't see anything in there but the test questions, so it looks like we're doing good so far. Feel free to ask me questions as we go along. I'll answer them if I can. If not, I'll say, hey, you know what, I'll get you the answer. May even have you email me the question later on if I can't get to it right away. But I'm happy to field those questions. All right, so the next thing I want to show you, though, really, really cool, I love this, is box selection. Now, if you've never seen this, and I just taught, this week we're on tour, actually, and we go on tour every year. We do what's called the Visual Studio Ultimate Tour, myself and a good friend of mine, Clint Edmondson, who worked for Microsoft. I've already visited several customers. In fact, just yesterday, I visited some customers who have been using Visual Studio for over a year, and I showed them this, and they never even knew this was available. So there's a lot of really good stuff here that you may not have even known about. Box selection is pretty powerful. Let me introduce it to you with the basics. If I hold down my Alt key on my keyboard and then click and drag with my mouse, that gives me a box selection. Now, that's not a new concept. I first found out about that concept in Word 6.0, about, 10 years ago or more. So it's not a new idea. What is new is the way we can use it in Visual Studio, and that's pretty powerful. So now I'm going to use my keyboard. I'm just going to hold down my Alt key on my keyboard, then hold down my Shift key, and use my right arrow to kind of come out a little bit, and then my down arrow to go down a little bit. And hopefully everybody can see that. That's a box selection. Now I'm going to use my left arrow to make this go on a diet, and there it is. Hopefully you see that thin blue line there, and that thin blue line has a special name. That's called a zero-length box selection, a zero-length box selection. And what that can do for you is this. And there you go. Immediately, even though I happen to put it in the wrong place, hang on, let me put it in my class code here, is where I meant to put it. This gives you a multi-line live cursor, a multi-line live cursor. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the telepathic interface yet, so you still have to, even though these are sample variables, I still have to change the names here. But, we're getting there. We're almost there. So there's good news for you. Now, it is live, so if I want to change all these 20s to 30s, for example, I can do Alt-Shift down arrow, get my thin blue line again, and change all the 20s to 30s. Very, very cool, very easy to do. It gets better. While I really like that feature, there's an even better thing I tend to take advantage of, and this is, normally I may have a scenario like this, and then I may have another variable, like here I'll do a public, double, call it Bubba. I'm from Texas, so I can get away with that. And there we go. So normally I might have a scenario like this where I'm looking at my variables, and I'm going, wow, you know what? I really need all these integers to be doubles, right? And all these ints to be doubles. So what do? Well, I do a single copy. So I copy the word double, and then I do a box selection around all these ints. I do a single copy, and then I do a multiple paste, multi-line paste. That is very, very powerful, and that has saved me just a lot of time. So, very cool stuff, right? You can copy one thing and have it paste on multiple lines. But it gets even better than that. Let's say I've decided all of a sudden that what I really want is for all these things to be public instead. Okay, no problem. I hold down my Alt key, use my mouse, make a nice little box selection here, and then I just start typing. It will automatically replace what I type with a multi-line cursor. So I'll say, okay, public int, and we're ready to rock and roll. Hopefully you like that, right? Hopefully you think that's pretty cool. I personally think it's really, really cool. I love that feature. And that's, again, called zero-link box selection. You can find it in the book. I have several examples of how to do this. In fact, pretty much exactly what you saw here. All right, so some of the other good stuff we have. Improved IntelliSense. Now, this one is my absolute favorite feature of all the features in 2010, mostly because IntelliSense hasn't fundamentally changed in a long time. I'm going to zoom in here and take a look at what I've zoomed in on here. This is the old IntelliSense. Now, IntelliSense actually came into being around the time of VB5. And from VB5 to literally Visual Studio 2008, IntelliSense didn't change much. It really just didn't. It was pretty much what you see here. I start typing, and then whatever I type, it gives me this big, long, huge alphabetical list, and then shows me in the list whatever I've typed, the same thing that begins with the letters that I've typed. So here you can see console.key, and then it shows me the things that begin with the letters K-E-Y, right? There's only one thing in this example. And that's pretty much the way IntelliSense has always been, and we've just accepted it. But now, 2010 represents a major, major shift in the way IntelliSense works. Now in 2010, if I say, for example, type the letters D-O, take a look at that list. First of all, look at the scroll bar. It's a significantly shorter list of items. Look at this, way shorter. Very, very short list of items. And every single item in there contains the letters D-O somewhere in it. So no longer is it a big list, and you have to type or remember what something begins with. Now it's a very short list, and everything that shows up has to contain somewhere in it the letters that you type. If you look at this list, for example, everything in there contains the letters D-O somewhere in it. And we did that for a very obvious reason. As your member names are getting longer and more descriptive, you can almost always remember what's inside a member name, even if you forget what it begins with. So that's a very, very valuable opportunity there. Because, you get these really long member names, and it gets confusing. But you can almost always remember something inside that member name. Now, it gets better. That's cool, but that's not the really cool part. It gets better. Do you see this member called app domain unloaded exception? And notice it's in Pascal case. App domain unloaded exception, uppercase A-D-U-E. Well, check this out. App domain unloaded exception, or any member name that's written in Pascal case, all you have to do is type the uppercase letters. App domain unloaded exception. Now that is seriously cool. That is what I love. No longer do you even have to remember all the words that are in a member name. As long as you remember some of the uppercase letters, you're fine. You may say to yourself, well, what if I don't remember all the uppercase letters? No problem. Just type what you remember, and it will automatically filter the list for you to show you those things that match. That's power. That is serious power, and that is my favorite feature in Visual Studio 2010, by the way. All right, I'm going to check real quick and see if there's any questions, and I'll just do a quick refresh here. Hopefully I'm doing it the right way. What do the icons mean in the IntelliSense demo? Okay, real quick, I'll answer that. What do the icons mean in the IntelliSense demo? These icons, actually, if you look in the book, I've actually got an entry on the object browser icons, and these icons are the same as those. And just real quickly, this icon here represents an enumeration. These are classes that you can see here. These are various class names. This is a protected method. It's got a little lock and a little purple flying square brick there. These are structures, double. These are known as structures. This is a snippet. It's actually a little piece of paper. And then this last thing here is an interface. So each of the icons has meaning. And if you look in the book on the item called Object Browser Icons, and I think if you just look at the index under icons, you'll find it, I actually explain what every one of those icons represents. All right, great question. Let me see. I think I had one more question there. If we can go ahead and get you up. Can you adjust the amount of recent templates stored? Great question, Matthew. Awesome question. The answer, I think Matthew, the answer is no. It's set at 5, and as far as I know, you can't change that. There may be some reg hack that I haven't looked at yet that might allow that, but I haven't found it, and honestly, I haven't even bothered to look. 5 is a good, solid number. I know for a fact it could never be higher. You could make it smaller, but to be honest, it's not that cluttered, even when you have a full 5, so I don't really consider it a big deal. Okay, we'll continue on now, and the next thing I want to talk about is MultiMon support. Now, this is also going to lead to another thing I want to talk about as well. First, MultiMon support. So, in Visual Studio 2010, we've had some pretty major changes to the ability to work with multiple monitors. But first, let's address what you already had before Visual Studio 2010. In all prior, or not all prior, but in prior versions of Visual Studio, you've always been able to take tool windows and rip them outside the IDE and stick them wherever you want. That's not new information. You've been able to do that for a while now, right? So if I want to take Solution Explorer and rip it out, that's fine. However, what you haven't been able to do until now is take document windows and click and drag them outside the IDE. That is new, and that is really, really cool, because now what you can do is you can rip those document windows off, put them on different monitors, and look at them outside the IDE. I love this feature, let me tell you. It gets better. Being able to rip the document windows outside the IDE is a new feature, but somebody asked me the other day, they said, look, I love this feature, but I'd like to be able to work on the same document on 3 different monitors. They had a particularly large document. Now, the first thing I said to him was, why do you have a document that large? But we won't go there, right? Let's assume that for whatever reason you have a very large document and you want to work on the same document on multiple monitors. Well, let me show you a feature that's been around a long time in Visual Studio. You can make Xerox copies of your code windows by going to Window and clicking on New Window. Window, New Window. When you do that, it's going to make copies. It even numbers them. You can see here's number 2, this is number 1, this is number 2. And if I go to Window, New Windows, number 3, I've actually tested this, I think, to about 156, 157 or so. So you can make quite a few copies. And yes, you can rip the copies outside the IDE so that they're all available outside the IDE as well. And by the way, when you do that, these are all live copies, right? These things are all live, and you can see the code being written live there. So I'm actually going to come into here, just kind of come to the same place in all of them so you can see them all at the same time, and watch this. Are you ready? Here we go. This is live. So you can literally work on the same document in multiple monitors at the same time, different documents, of course. That's very obvious. So very, very cool stuff. Now, I'm actually going to give you a bonus. I'm going to show you a feature that is not in the book that I just found out about the other day and will be in the next revision of the book, but I hadn't realized this was possible. Whenever you want to automatically redock these document windows, you can actually hold down your Control key and double-click on the title bar, and it will dock it back. Now, it's a little strange behavior in some of them. Sometimes we'll put them kind of at the bottom, and you can kind of stick them back at the top, and I'm not sure why it does that. I haven't explored that yet, but here I'll just rip it off, Control, double-click, and it docks it right back again. So very, very, very cool feature. Not in the book, so a little extra bonus for you there. Okay, let me check again, make sure there's no questions I'm missing here. Looks like we're doing good. Okay, no questions so far. Great. So let's go ahead and move on. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the call hierarchy. Call hierarchy is very, very cool. And then let me explain why. Let's assume you've got some code that you've been working with, and you've got basically a bunch of calls that you're kind of messing around with, something like that. Maybe I have A calling B calling C or whatever it happens to be you have. Here I've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, right? And it's just a bunch of methods calling each other. In the past, when you wanted to explore the call stacks with that, or what's calling into what you'd have to do is kind of go deep into the stack, set a breakpoint, build your project or solution, hit the breakpoint, and then look at your call stack window. And that's all very cumbersome, because you're in the middle of writing code. You don't want to stop, build, set a breakpoint, do all these funky things. Well, the good news is you don't have to anymore. The good news is we now have this thing called the call hierarchy. And what the call hierarchy allows you to do is locate any method, right-click on the method, and go to View Call Hierarchy, View Call Hierarchy. And when you click on that, it's going to give you this really awesome window that will show you the call hierarchy. So here it's got fa, and if I expand that, it actually shows calls to and calls from the fa method. And if I expand those, guess what? It's going to show me all the methods calling into and where fa is calling out to. It gets better than that. If I actually click on an individual item and come over to the right, the call site is the detail. It shows me the piece of calling code and the location of that calling code. And it gets even better than that. If I double-click on this call site, it will actually take me to the line of calling code in my editor, no matter where it is. So that's pretty darn powerful stuff. I love this feature, by the way. It's a really awesome, awesome feature. By the way, good news, this was only available for C++ and C# in Visual Studio 2010, but in Dev 11, the next version of Visual Studio, VB coders will also have this feature. In fact, I've written an article on it recently. It's really, really nice. Works great. Okay, now we're into the breakpoints window. Now, this is pretty powerful stuff, folks, and I want to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent for a second. I don't know if you know this, but Visual Studio 2010 represents a major, major change for the Visual Studio product. Visual Studio 2010 was completely rewritten in WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. And because of that rewrite, it allowed us to do a lot of really cool things. Let me show you one of the cool things. For example, if you're in your code window and you want to change the size of your fonts, you can hold down your control key on your keyboard and use the mouse on the wheel on your mouse. Sorry, use the wheel on your mouse. So control wheel on your mouse, and you can make the font very, very big, or very, very small, or anything in between. Right? Very, very, very cool. If you want to use your keyboard, by the way, it's Control Shift, greater than and less than, and this is all in the book. Right, for the zoom. By the way, one other thing that I include in the book is if you kind of mess up and get this thing too big and you want to go back to normal, right, I use that term in quotes, if you want to go back to 100% zoom, if you look in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you'll notice there's a nice little zoom area here. If you click on that and then click on 100%, it will take you back to the normal size. So there you go. So that notwithstanding, though, because of the rewrite in WPF, it allowed us the opportunity to do a lot of things. One of the things we did was completely rewrite the breakpoints window. The breakpoints window is way different than what you ever knew before. And it represents the first generation of a new concept that we've introduced now in Dev 11 as well in all the major tool windows. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to come into my code here, and I'm going to set a few breakpoints. And then I'm going to bring up my breakpoints window. Now, when I bring up my breakpoints window, you'll notice I've got all my breakpoints here, which is great. One of the things, let me see, I've got one there that I didn't want. One of the things, though, that I want to point out is if you've been looking at your breakpoints window, I don't know if you've noticed this labels column here. It's this big empty space that a lot of people just didn't even notice before. Prior to Visual Studio 2010, whenever you wanted to sort your breakpoints, you had to sort by one of the columns that already existed. And if you didn't want to sort by that, well, too bad. Now, with the labels column, you can actually apply your own tokens to breakpoints. Let me show you what I mean. If I have a breakpoint here, I can right-click on the breakpoint and go to Edit Labels, Edit Labels. And when I do that, it's going to give me the opportunity to add a new label. I'm going to add a label called Bubba and click on Add. And then click on OK. Do you notice now down here it has the Bubba label associated with this breakpoint? You can do it that way, or if you have a whole bunch of breakpoints, you can do it in bulk by going to the Breakpoints window, selecting a bunch of breakpoints, right-clicking on them, and going to Edit Labels. Then you can type in or select an existing label, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to select Bubba and click on OK. So you got a couple of options there. Now I'm going to quickly do that with these, the rest of these here. Right-click, Edit Labels, say Ice Cream, and click on Add. By the way, you can have multiple labels per breakpoint. So I'll add another one called George. Click on OK, and you can see now I have multiple labels there. All right, once you've done that, the first, most obvious, most immediate benefit is your ability to sort your labels now into logical groupings based on whatever label you decide to put in. I've seen everything as simple as, calling some breakpoints A, calling some B, C, and so forth, all the way to very complex descriptions of the breakpoints and everything in between. So you can sort your labels now into logical groupings, but another really, really cool thing you can do is you now have the ability for the first time to search your breakpoints. I can come into the search area. Let's say I want to search for all breakpoints that begin with the letter B. Now I'm going to warn you right away, it's not going to work the way you think. So I'm going to type the letter B and press Enter. It looks like nothing happened. And the first time people tend to use the search, they get a little disenchanted because they think it doesn't work. Well, actually, it did work just fine. I said search for the letter B in all visible columns, right here, in all visible columns. Well, if you look at every single breakpoint, it has the letter B somewhere in it. These first three have B and Bubba. These last three have B in the word break here. Break always, break always, break always. So they all have the letter B somewhere in them. Probably what I really meant to do was just search on the labels column. So if I say search on the labels column, now it filters out those items I don't want to see. And now we're going to get to probably the most important thing you're going to hear from me today. And here it is. In the Breakpoints window in Visual Studio 2010, every action that you take will only impact the results of the current search criteria. Or, put another way, every action you take will only impact those breakpoints you can currently see. I'll prove it. You remember delete all breakpoints? Delete all breakpoints used to delete all your breakpoints, right? No exceptions. But it doesn't do that anymore. Now delete all breakpoints deletes all breakpoints matching the current search criteria. Let me show you that again. Delete all breakpoints matching the current search criteria. That's how all these buttons work. So, for example, if I go to disable these breakpoints, right, I just disable all breakpoints. Well, it disabled all breakpoints matching the current search criteria. When I remove the search criteria, this X over here to the right, those breakpoints I couldn't see were not affected. It doesn't touch them. So what we've gone from is a sledgehammer, delete all breakpoints, disable all breakpoints, to a fine scalpel for doing surgery on your breakpoints. Only delete or disable or do whatever to those breakpoints that match a certain search criteria. So this is a very refined way of working with your breakpoints. Very, very, very powerful. You may have 50 breakpoints, but you only want to disable 20 of them that match some search criteria. Now you can do it. Now you can select groups of breakpoints to perform actions on. It gets better than that. For the first time ever, Now in Visual Studio 2010, we have the ability to export our breakpoints. That's a feature we've been wanting for a lot of years. You now have the ability to export your breakpoints. And what does that mean? Well, you can now export your breakpoints matching the current search criteria. So if you have 50 breakpoints, but you do a search and it only shows 20, it will export just those 20. So make sure you're aware of that. But the reason we gave you the ability to export your breakpoints is so you can share your breakpoints with other team members. By default, breakpoints are stored in your SUO file, Solution User Options. It can't be shared. But now that you can export them, so I'll click on Export, and it does export them as XML. I'll just create a new file called blah. It exports them as XML, which is plain text, which means you can even use like a PowerShell script or something to change values in the breakpoints in text. I'm just going to go ahead and save that, and there you go. So that's what the experience looks like when you export your breakpoints. Now on the other side, when your team member gets the breakpoints, here's what the experience will be like. They don't have any breakpoints. They'll go to Import Breakpoints. They'll find the file that you gave them, or that they got from source control, hopefully, and boom, they'll get their breakpoints added in there. Now that's the good news. Here's the bad news. If you export your breakpoints and then make some changes to your code after you've done the export, and then your partner goes to import those breakpoints, as you can imagine, bad things will happen. There's going to be breakpoints where you didn't want them to be. So make absolutely sure that you're done with the changes to the code before you export your breakpoints. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with breakpoints where you don't want them. So be warned. That's just something that happens sometimes. It's not hard to remember, but it may burn you first a couple of times. All right, so that's pretty much it for breakpoints. Let me see if we've got any questions. We'll keep on going here. Hopefully you guys are liking this. Is it possible to open a new window on another monitor by default? No. No, unfortunately it isn't, Powell. You first have to open them up inside Visual Studio and then rip them out and put them on whatever monitor you want. As far as I know, the window state isn't stored that way, where it's automatically outside the IDE. So sorry about that. Okay, good stuff. So moving right along. The next thing we're going to look at is data tips. Now, when I'm on the road with my buddy Clint, he loves these data tips. This is one of his favorite features, and I like it too, but IntelliSense is my favorite feature. But here with data tips now, let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. I'm just going to set a breakpoint, run my code, and I'm going to, once the code runs, I'm going to go ahead and hit the breakpoint here in a second. There it is, hit the breakpoint. And you know, and you have known that for quite some time, when you put your mouse over a variable, it's going to give you this lovely little data tip, right? This is not new information. And of course, you can change the value of the variable and do whatever you want to with it. What's new is this nice little push pin here to the right. When you click on the push pin, that turns this data tip into a pinned data tip. A pinned data tip. Now, I know it's pinned because it looks different. The little push pin over here to the right is pinned down, but if I look way to the left, there's another push pin over here. So that's how I know it's pinned, and that's how I know what line it's pinned to. By the way, you can click and drag these things and pin them to different lines if you want. I'm going to leave it kind of right there. Now, what's the value of a pinned data tip, you may ask? Well, pinned data tips we tend to do with variables that go out of scope, so we'll pin them to the lines that are relevant, and then as we're stepping through our code, pinned data tips get out of our face. So when they're not relevant, they're not in our face, and we can continue working on other things. That's the value of a pinned data tip. When they're relevant, you see them. When they're not relevant, they're out of your way. That's why we love pinned data tips. By the way, when you put your mouse over any data tip like this, it gives you this nice little control panel so you can close it, which is get rid of it. We'll get to unpinning in a second. And you can add comments. And you can add a lot of comments here. Whatever you want, feel free to be as verbose as you want. I've actually copied and pasted the entire text of War and Peace in here before. I don't recommend it. It will crash Visual Studio, but hey, you know what? That means you can write a lot of comments, though. Also, if you want to, you can collapse these comments through this little control panel here. All right, so that's pinned data tips. We have the concept of another kind of data tip as well, If I have a higher level variable, I haven't done it here, but let's assume I had a higher level variable, or I just want to keep an eye on a variable all the time, I can put my mouse over any variable, and actually I haven't done it here, so bear with me as I do it. It's not going to let me do it in debug mode. All right, so I'll have to wing it here. Let's say I want to keep an eye on D all the time and don't want to make it a pinned data tip. Well, I first pin it down, and then I click on this little unpin. I click on unpin, and that turns it into a floating data tip. Floating data tips, unlike pinned data tips, always stay up to give you kind of a dashboard experience. So floating data tips are always there so that you can see what the value of something is. We tend to use them with higher level variables that don't go out of scope as easily, whereas pinned data tips are used with variables that do go out of scope easily. So there you have it, two different types of data tips. And yes, you can add comments or do whatever you want, just like with a pinned data tip to a floating data tip. Very, very valuable. It gets even better than that, though. Let's say you stop debugging. And you've stopped debugging, and you're looking at your code, and all of a sudden you say to yourself, wow, you know what? I forgot what the value of this variable was that I'd done a data tip on. I forgot what the value was while I was debugging. Well, not a problem. If you put your mouse over the push pin, it will show you the value from the last debug session. That is a seriously cool feature, and hopefully you like it as much as I do. That is the part my buddy Clint loves the best. Shows you the value from the last debug session. And one more thing, since we're talking about this, just like your breakpoints, your data tips can be shared with other team members. If you go to debug on your menu bar, there's an export and import data tips option. So you can export and import your data tips with other team members. Feel free to take advantage of that and check those things into source control as well. So very, very, very cool features. Hopefully you like those. Very awesome features. I love those features. All right, continuing right along. The online help. Now, this is one I struggle with because I've really found out that a lot of people don't tend to use our help very much. They tend to use Bing to search or the G word to search, and they'll search for whatever, right? I work for Microsoft, so I have to say the G word instead of Google. Just kidding. But anyway, if you happen to use our online help, what do? Well, you may go to help, view help, or you may hit F1 to get help on something, whatever it happens to be. Here, that's what I'll do in this case. I'll do an F1 experience, and it'll pop up the online help. It actually did it twice, which is really fun. But when you do that, by default, the online help looks something like this, which is not a really great experience in my opinion. I missed the table of contents. Well, the good news is if you look up and to the right, you'll see three words, classic, lightweight, or script-free. Now, if you're logged in, I believe you'll see the word preferences instead. If you click on preferences, then it will show you classic, lightweight, and script-free. If you click on the word classic, it will give you back the table of contents, and the table of contents will automatically synchronize with whatever help topic you're looking at. So if I want to look up lambda expressions, for example, I just search for it, click on the entry, and it automatically shows me the help item and synchronizes the table of contents so I can continue to browse on similar topics. That's very, very powerful. And if you didn't know that existed, it'd probably drive you a little bit crazy. Really, really, really powerful stuff. So hopefully you'll be able to do that and kind of use that feature. Okay, let me check and see if there's any questions. I want to make sure I'm not missing questions here. How do you work with client-side JavaScript in debugging? That's a little beyond the scope of what I address here, Walt, but we do have some pretty fantastic updates to working with JavaScript in Dev 11. What I would suggest you do is check out Scott Goo's blog if you're not familiar with it. He covers a lot of that stuff, Scott Guthrie, or check out some of my teammates. I have a teammate, Brandon Satrom, who does a lot of writing on HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Check out one of my peers. They may have some better insights into that. I really kind of don't dig into that too much here. The only thing I really know, just off the top of my head, is that we've just significantly improved the JavaScript experience, particularly in the IntelliSense area. And as far as the debug experience goes, not quite sure. Haven't really played with it that much. Let me kind of refresh there and move on to the next question. Can you have a pin and a breakpoint on the same line? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Matthew. No problem. Proof of concept, I'll just do it here real quick. Here I'll set a breakpoint on this line, F9. Go ahead and run the code. Get into it, deep stack, boom, there it is. And then I'll go ahead and set a pin on this as well. I think the pin shows up, yeah, it does, underneath it. So it's kind of hard to see, but it is there. So yes, you can have a pin and a breakpoint on the same line. Let's see what it looks like outside that experience. Now, it still shows up underneath it. So I guess it'd be kind of hard to get to it at that point, so I'm not sure how that experience is going to work out, but it is possible to have them both on the same line. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, tips for almost any version. Now we're into tips that you can use with any version of Visual Studio back to 2005 is what I've tested it to. And this is where we get into some interesting stuff. I'm always asked what in my book or when I'm on the road and I teach tips and tricks, what is the number one tip that I want everybody to know, no matter what version of Visual Studio they use, what is the number one tip? And without a doubt, the number one tip I want everybody to know is how to create item and project templates. I believe that is the most important skill you can have in Visual Studio. Now, having said that, there are limitations. I don't believe C++ projects and items can have templates made out of them. So I'm really just talking about managed code developers for these examples, C#, VB, F#, and so on. So with that said, let me show you how you can create your own item and project templates. And actually, before I even do that, let me give you a story, a true story that happened to me. One of the things I tend to do as I work for Microsoft, I help create .NET user groups inside companies. And we created a .NET user group inside one of our customers one time, a large customer that sells computers. And I was there showing them exactly what I'm showing you today. And I showed them how to create project templates. And there happened to be a VP there, and when I showed them this, he just went crazy. He was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. You've got to show it to, it happened to be a person that wasn't in attendance at the time. So when I was done with the meeting, I went to this person's cube, who was over the web projects that they do at this company, and turns out what they were doing was this. What they would do is they were doing MVC projects for their web apps, and they'd create an MVC project, and then they had several pages, about 4 to 6 pages front to back, that they'd literally flip through and follow. It's like step 1, put in this copyright note. Step 2, put this button here. Step 3, do this. Everything they needed to get it all standard so that then they could begin writing whatever code they were going to write. So all the websites had to have a standard, and then you could add extra stuff to it. But just to get to the standard, they had to do the MVC template and then about 2.5 to 3 hours of work flipping through these pages and adding all this stuff. And as you might expect, every time somebody did this, inevitably there were errors that were introduced. They'd forget to put on a copyright, or they'd forget to put a button somewhere, or whatever. After showing them this, they went from about 2.5 to 3 hours of work to about 2.5 to 3 seconds of work. That is the value of templates, the ability to set something up so you can instantly get it, and particularly with Visual Studio, save you hours and hours and hours of work. So, with that said, let me show you how we do this. So let's assume that at your company, we'll call it XYZ company, at your company, you're required whenever you have classes to do certain things. So here I'm just going to right-click, add a class to this project. And I'll just call it Class 1. I'm not really concerned about the class name. But here it's just Class 1, fine, whatever. And this could be anything. This could be a module. This could be an EF model. It could be whatever you want it to be. But let's say at our company, at XYZ, you're always required to have a using statement for system text regular expressions, because I love regular expressions. Let's see, they're old. Let's say the owner is old school, came from the mainframe days, so the owner likes you to have flower boxes, right? You remember the old flower boxes where you'd have, these things? Don't you hate these things? Right? I really hate these things. But let's assume that they wanted where you had to put in, file name and, wow, just crazy stuff. Whatever. And let's assume then you also have to have some other stuff, maybe some database code, whatever it is you happen to have, right, or need to have. Now, I'm not doing it justice here. Here I'm just throwing in a bunch of comments for demo purposes, but I want to make it really, really clear what needs to go here. If you're creating a class, this might be a database access class, right? So flesh it out. Write all the code that connects to the database, pulls back whatever needs to be pulled back, and so on and so on. Put all the code in there that needs to be in there. Don't hold back. You're turning it into a template. Do it, and do it right. All right, with that said, once you're ready to take whatever you've created and turn it into a template, here's what you do. You go to File on your menu bar and click on Export Template. Export Template. When you click on Export Template, it will automatically want to save the solution. So just say yes, save the solution. There are two types of templates you can create, project templates and item templates. Believe it or not, it's harder to create item templates than project templates. So we're going to start with that, right? An item template is an individual item, a class, module, whatever you have to be creating. So I'm going to create an item template and click on Next. Oh, by the way, choose the correct project from the solution as well. So be careful about that. If you got multiple projects in the solution, make sure to choose the correct project. And then click on Next. Now, I know these look like checkboxes, but these are really square radio buttons. Okay? I'm just kidding, right? Somebody messed up here. Somebody put checkboxes where they were supposed to be a single select. So even though it looks like you can select multiple items, the truth of the matter is you can only select one thing, the one item that is going to be the template. So here I select the class 1, and click on Next. Now this part's interesting. This part is where you'd add in any custom references. And I forgot to mention that. At your work, you probably have custom assemblies you use, maybe that help you access, web services or whatever it is you need to do. So make sure and if you've written out your code, you would have done it. You would have added the appropriate reference, assembly references or service references that make the code work, right? The code wouldn't work without it. That's why I really want you to write a bunch of code and make it work. So in this case, let's assume I need custom marshallers for some reason. Now, that's not in there by default, but I've added it in. I've also added in the JavaScript library, too, just for fun. Bear with me as I go back to Export Templates. So you need to do that ahead of time. I did, and I forgot. So now I've got to go back and go back here, single item here, next. There we go. Now, what do I do here? Well, now I can select multiple items, in this case the JavaScript library and the custom marshallers, multiple items that weren't in the defaults. Now, that's one path you can take. If you know this class is always going to be used in Visual Studio and it's always going to have, the base assemblies in it and so on and so forth, go for it. Just check off the additional items that you added that weren't there by default, right? Typically, your custom assemblies, your custom web references, whatever. If, however, you're not certain, feel free to check all of these off. It will automatically add all the references as appropriate. There's no drawback to doing it, so please feel free to do it. Also, be warned. Notice this warning. You've selected one or more assembly references that are not pre-installed with Visual Studio. Having these references may prevent the use of this template. The user doesn't have the reference assemblies installed. What that means is very straightforward. If you have a custom assembly or a custom reference that you've referred to, make sure that the person using this template has access to that. If it's assembly, make sure it's in the GAC or somewhere in their assembly path. If it isn't, then when they use the template, it will have a reference, but it will be a broken reference, right? And then they'll be mad at you, and you really don't want that. So here you go. Make sure that whatever assemblies that you said they need to use, that they have access to. Once you've done that, click on Next. And this is the easy part of the whole thing. give the template a name. I recommend about 50 to 60 characters, although you can do more. And I also recommend including a noun always to indicate what kind of thing this is. So this is a webcast thing, so we'll call this for my webcast audience, webcast class, right? And now that's not very descriptive. Maybe this is accessing database, or maybe it's accessing a catalog, a set of catalog information. So maybe I make this catalog database class, right? Maybe a little more descriptive. Regardless of what you do here, still keep it kind of small. Regardless of what you do here, in the template description, that is the most important piece of this whole thing. In the template description, that is your one and only chance to be absolutely, positively clear about what this template is supposed to be used for. So don't miss out on it. You type as much as you possibly can. There is no such thing as too little information here. So if this thing was, a class used to access catalog information on the SQL server, for, identifying shoe, sales or whatever, blah, 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 for, year ends. You see where I'm going with this. Be very, 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 very descriptive here, because you can have a horrifically bad template name and still redeem yourself with a template description. But it is your only chance to really be clear about what that template should be used for. Okay, that brings us to the icon image and the preview image. I've got mixed feelings about this. I used to tell people, don't worry about the icon image and preview image, forget about it, they're useless, they're a waste of your time. I still believe that with the icon image. However, certain members of the Visual Studio team have convinced me that there might be some value to the preview image. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do preview image. Bear with me as I pop up my Snagit. Oh, I did not just do that. Okay. That's okay. I've got to get my Snagit running, but I think I got the wrong Snagit there, so hopefully I'll just cancel that out. And let's see if I can get my Snagit editor. No, I'm still going to configure. Okay, well, we'll just cancel out of that. One of the things that you'll need is something that can get a screenshot for you. And so hopefully I've got, there we go. Okay, there we go. Now we're good. So if you're going to do a preview image, I recommend you do it ahead of time, not on the fly like I'm about to do it. But here's the steps you'd go through. So if you're doing a preview image, you'd pull up the template class, right? You pull up the class that you're working with that you're going to turn into a template, or whatever it happens to be. It may not be a class, but whatever it is, find a chunk of code that kind of represents what that template's about, whatever it happens to be, or a picture if it's a GUI item, maybe one of the screens or whatever it happens to be, a set of buttons or whatever it is that you feel represents in a visual way what that's about. Then take a screenshot of it, and using your editor of choice, in this case I'm using Snagit, that's what I use, go ahead and crop out the pieces that are relevant, just like I've done, and then save the image. I'm going to save it to my desktop here. Now once you've done that, and then I'm done with that, at the time you do the preview image, you can just add that in there and point to it. And it supports several formats. In this case I'm doing PNG. But there it is. There's that preview image. And I'll show you that later on, but that's that easy, right? Find a little chunk of something, take a screenshot of it, and then browse to it and stick it in as a preview image. Now moving right along, the output location. All templates, regardless of version back to 2005, are always stored in My Documents, Visual Studio, some version, 2005, 2008, 2010 in this case, My Exported Templates. The My Exported Templates folder is actually a big old bucket of all the templates you've ever created, right? It's all in there. So be aware of that. But just because you create a template does not mean it's usable in Visual Studio. It just means you've created a template. We'll get to that in a minute as well. By the way, All templates, regardless of the kind of template you're creating, whether it's item templates or project templates, all templates are always zip files. They're always zip files. So you can look inside of them, add stuff to them, tweak them, whatever you want to do. Now, beyond that, we've got two other options. Automatically import, and I use that term in quotes, the template into Visual Studio. What that's going to do, it's not really an import. It sounds fancier than it is. It's actually going to copy the zip file to a location that makes it usable in Visual Studio or makes it available in the IDE. And then the last option, display an Explorer window in the Output Files folder. That's just going to pop up an Explorer window showing you my exported templates. So once you've got everything kind of set up the way you want, and I always check these last two, just click on Finish. It's automatically going to open and show you my exported templates, which is everything you've done. You can see I recently did a gig at a couple of customer sites there, and there's the template we created, Webcast Catalog Database Class. And if I double click on it and look inside of it, you can see it has our preview image, a default icon image, the actual code that we're going to use for the template, and then this last guy, which is really where all the magic happens, the .vs template file. That's an XML file that has all the references, all the information about this template. Is it a C# or VB template? Is it what is it? Is it a class? Is it an entity framework thing? Or what the heck is it? So it contains all that metadata. And yes, you can open it up and edit it if you want to, and I know plenty of folks who do. But with that said, once you've created a template, just because it's here doesn't mean it's usable in Visual Studio. To make it usable in Visual Studio, this file needs to be copied to the correct location. Well, what's the correct location? Well, the correct location is My Documents, Visual Studio, Your Version, Templates, the Templates directory, and then the kind of template, in this case, Item Templates, right? And that's where you stick it, right there. And I'm going to get rid of that. You can tell I've been doing some other stuff here. Once you've got it there, you can see it's in this folder, right? Templates, Item Templates. And that means it's usable in Visual Studio. So that means if I actually go back into the IDE and say Add New Item, there is our template. Notice the template here. Notice it's got the title. Notice it's got the description to the right. And notice the preview image that shows up as well over to the lower right. Pretty darn cool stuff. Pretty darn cool stuff, but it gets better. If you're going to go to the trouble of creating templates, I want you to do it right, and let me show you what I mean by doing it right. By doing it right, what I mean is you're going to go ahead and create a folder structure around this. So just going this far is okay, but it's better if you create a new folder for your company. We call our XYZ, so I'll call this XYZ Company. And then inside that, I'm going to have database classes. Right? I'm just creating folders. This isn't anything. This isn't rocket science. I'm just creating folders. I'm going to cut this thing now, go into these folders and paste. And now just by virtue of creating a folder structure, now when I go to add a new item, it has XYZ Company down here. I can expand it, go to database classes, and there's my database class. So if you're going to go to the trouble of creating templates, then go the extra mile and organize it by folders. And yes, in case you're wondering, all of this is in the book. I go through this in very great detail, just as you saw it here. Okay, great. Well, then that begs the question. Once you do that, and it'll automatically add all the references and everything, by the way, by default. But we can do a proof of concept here. We might as well, since we're here. Let me go ahead and just create a brand new, off-the-shelf console app. You can see here the references. It has all the standard ones, but it doesn't have the extra stuff yet. But if I go to Add New Item, by the way, I can either drill down into it or just search, right? I can search for, what do we call this, database, webcast class, I think. There it is. So I can do it. This is where searching really comes in handy when you create your own custom templates too. But there it is. I can click on Add. Notice it adds those extra things, right, those extra references, and give us a nice little starter template here. Very, very powerful stuff. Now, to create project templates, it's even easier. All you have to do is, once you've got a project set up all the way you want it, right? This is what they did at that company I was telling you about. They spent several hours getting the project with all the base code, all the copyright notices, all the base images, everything you needed to get started, and more, tons of working code. And then they turned the whole project into a template. And to do project templates, it's way easier. You just go to File, Export Template, save your solution, indicate you want to do a project template and choose the correct template. Click on Next. Give the template a name. We'll call this Webcast Project. Webcast Project. Again, be descriptive with your description, please. That was a little redundant. Descriptive with your description. In this case, you do the icon image and preview image or not, I don't care. Everything else stays the same. Click on Finish. It's done, right? Go ahead and go that extra mile. Go into the Templates directory, Project Templates, create your folder structure, XYZ Company, and I'll just do it shallow for now and just stick this in here. And then when you go to create a new project, there it is, XYZ Company, boom, and you're ready to go. The whole project turned into a template. All the references, all the forms, all the everything, whatever it is, you just set it all up, put everything in there you want, and take the whole darn project and turn it into a template. And that will save you literally hours, if not days, of work. Okay, so I'm just about done, but I'll check for questions here. I expect there's a lot of them. What is the downside of importing an 05 project to 2010 and keeping it at Framework 2.0? I really don't know of any, Otto, to be honest. The only thing it does when you import solutions and projects from one version to another is it uses metadata and changes the solution files, the SLN or the proj files, but it doesn't really impact the actual code. So you'll import it, it'll still stay on Framework 2. No impact beyond that. I mean, that's it. You just can't take it back to 05. So I don't see any impact, to be honest. I'm not aware of any. Next question, Matthew. Will Microsoft design Visual Studio with MultiMonitor support in the next version? Absolutely. In fact, that will be ongoing from now until, as far as I know, until the end of time.